Welcome back to another podcast. As always, things are crazy here. Seriously, when is Israel ever boring? Let's move away from the obvious questions about Iran, which we looked at last time, and talk about India and Israel. An overlooked headline today was that Indian PM Narendra Modi visited Israel. So who cares? Well, this is why it is important when you look at the world the way strategists do, not as a collection of flags on a map but as a network of pressure points, choke points, and capability clusters. Two places keep lighting up again and again: Israel and India. And it's not because they're the biggest or the loudest, it's because they sit right on the seams of global power, the places where the next world order is being stitched together. Take Israel. People often talk about it through the lens of conflict, but if you zoom out, you see something different. You see a state with global grade military capabilities, intelligence reach that shapes counterterrorism far beyond its borders, and a technology ecosystem that punches way above its weight. Israel isn't just reacting to the region, it's shaping the strategic environment around it. Its air and missile defenses influence planning from the Gulf to Europe. Its cyber capabilities are part of the backbone of Western aligned security networks. And its geography, that's the part people underestimate. Israel sits at the junction of the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Gulf, the western anchor of a corridor that connects Europe to the Middle East and increasingly to the Indo Pacific. Even when political projects stall, the underlying logic doesn't go away. Israel is a gateway node. Now shift your gaze east. India isn't a rising power anymore, it's a repositioning power. It sits astride the sea lanes that carry Gulf energy to East Asia, and that alone makes it central to the Indo Pacific balance. But it's more than geography. India is transforming its defense posture, moving from importer to co producer, and that shift is strategic. Its partnerships with Israel aren't just about buying equipment, they're about co developing it. Missiles, drones, electronic warfare, cyber tools. India gets autonomy from Russia, leverage with the West, and capabilities that directly affect its ability to manage Pakistan and deter China. And despite all the talk about strategic autonomy, India's behavior tells the real story. Deeper ties with the US, Japan, the Gulf states, and yes, Israel. It's not an ally, but it's a structural partner. And this is where the story gets really interesting, because the Israel India relationship isn't just a friendly bilateral tie. It's a capability driven axis built on shared threat maps and complementary strengths. Israel brings innovation, speed, and battlefield tested tech. India brings scale, geography, and long term strategic weight. Together, they form a defense and technology ecosystem that sits outside Chinese supply chains and increasingly outside Russian ones. Their intelligence cooperation is deep, their defense cooperation is deeper, and their strategic logic is aligned. Both face multi-front hybrid threats, both deal with missile proliferation, drones, and cross-border militancy, both operate in regions where great power competition is intensifying. And once you lay that out, the next question is obvious. How does this affect China? Well, from Beijing's perspective, this partnership is a problem. China has spent the last 2 decades building influence across the Middle East through the Belt and Road Initiative, port investments, energy deals, and digital infrastructure. It wants a quiet, predictable region where it can move goods, secure energy, and expand its tech footprint. But a strong Israel India axis complicates that picture. India is already China's main continental rival, a demographic giant sitting on its southern flank, controlling access to the Indian Ocean. Now add Israel into the mix, a state with advanced defense tech, cyber capabilities, and deep ties to Washington. When India buys Israeli drones, missile systems, sensors, and cyber tools, it's not just upgrading its military, it's narrowing the technological gap with China. And when India co develops systems with Israel, it's building capabilities that Beijing can't easily track or counter. China also has to factor in the maritime angle. India sits on the sea lanes that carry Middle Eastern energy to East Asia. Israel sits at the Mediterranean end of emerging trade and energy corridors. If those two states coordinate, even informally, China's freedom of movement becomes more complicated. Not blocked, not threatened, but less predictable. And unpredictability is the one thing Beijing hates in its supply chains. And then there's the intelligence dimension. Israel has one of the most sophisticated intelligence ecosystems in the world. India has one of the most strategically important. When those two share information on cyber threats, on militant networks, on regional actors, China has to assume that some of its activities, whether in the Gulf, Pakistan, or the Indian Ocean, are being watched more closely than before. It's not a formal alliance, but it's a structural constraint on China's room to maneuver. Now flip the map and look at this from Washington's point of view. The US has been trying to build a distributed security architecture, not a new NATO, not a set of rigid alliances, but a network of capable partners who can stabilize their own regions and align with US interests without requiring constant American intervention. Israel and India fit that model perfectly. Israel anchors the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean. India anchors the Indian Ocean and Indo-Pacific. And when those two cooperate, Washington doesn't have to build everything bilaterally. We can rely on interlocking partnerships. That's the logic behind frameworks like I2U2, India, Israel, the UAE, and the US, which is basically a test case for linking the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific through technology, energy, and security cooperation. For the US, this is ideal. It means Israel can handle more of the regional deterrence burden. It means India can shoulder more of the Indo-Pacific balancing burden. And it means the US can focus its resources where they matter most without abandoning key regions. Israel and India don't replace American power, they amplify it. And here's where the Gulf states enter the picture. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, they're all watching this emerging architecture very closely. For them, Israel-India cooperation isn't a threat, it's an opportunity. The Gulf states want diversified security partners, advanced technology, and access to new trade corridors. Israel gives them cutting-edge defense and intelligence capabilities. India gives them markets, manpower, and a massive consumer base. Together, Israel and India offer the Gulf something neither China nor the US can provide alone, a multipolar set of options that reduces dependence on any single great power. And then there's Iran. For Tehran, this emerging architecture is a strategic headache. Iran has built its regional influence through proxies, missile networks, and asymmetric warfare. But a stronger Israel-India axis, especially one linked to Gulf states, raises the cost of Iranian adventurism. Israel already counters Iran directly. India, meanwhile, has deep energy ties with the Gulf and growing security ties with Israel. Iran has to assume that any move it makes in the Gulf, in the Red Sea, in the Indian Ocean is being watched by a network of states that don't coordinate formally, but whose interests increasingly overlap. And now zoom out even further, because Europe is part of this story too. Europe is desperate for energy diversification, supply chain resilience, and access to stable trade corridors that bypass Russia. Israel gives Europe Eastern Mediterranean gas, cybersecurity partnerships, and a foothold in Middle Eastern stability. India gives Europe access to Indo-Pacific markets, manufacturing alternatives to China, and a partner in maritime security. When Israel and India strengthen their cooperation, Europe benefits indirectly. New corridors open, new energy routes become viable, and Europe gains more non-Russian, non-Chinese options. And finally, global energy flows. This is where everything converges. The Gulf supplies the energy, India consumes it, Europe needs alternatives, Israel sits on the transit routes, China depends on the whole system, staying predictable. The US wants the system to stay open without policing every inch of it. When Israel and India coordinate, even loosely, they influence how energy moves, where it moves, and who controls the choke points. That's not symbolic, that's structural. So when we talk about Israel and India being crucial, we're not talking about sentiment or symbolism. We're talking about architecture, the architecture of power, in a world where the old structures are fading and new ones are emerging. Israel and India sit at the junctions where influence flows, where supply chains converge, where great power strategies collide, and together they shape the environment that China, the United States, the Gulf states, Iran, Europe, and the global energy system now have to operate in.